Fundamentalism is a type of religious belief that is based on a very literal interpretation of sacred texts within that religion. It can cause violence or other forms of confrontation, and those involved in fundamentalist activities believe these texts to hold a monopoly of the truth. Although the term was originally used in reference to Christianity, it is now used more openly and linked to all religions, and after many recent attacks it is now often unfairly associated with Islamism, mainly due to the recent events linked to groups like ISIS. At the time of the Second World War, fundamentalist beliefs led to political domination and mass genocide based off irrational and unrealistic beliefs. Strangely, prior to the Nazi regime and even during, the main religion in Germany was Christianity. Many, including Hitler himself, considered themselves a part of this religion. The actions of the Nazis are a good example of how fundamental religious beliefs can be taken to an extreme. At the time, it was believed that to be a true Christian, you had to believe in Germanism, and to be a true German, you had to be a Christian. Therefore, the two things became linked together, and this was like a form of nationalism. Many of the Nazis were devout Christians, and in 1933, Hitler signed the Nazi Vatican Concordat, which stated that the Catholic Church would support Hitler politically. The Nazis were able to capitalise on these religious beliefs and use them to their own advantage. In a similar way to creating their symbol, they took something that was well recognised by the country and made it their own. The Nazis took the well-loved ideologies and made them their own as well. Hitler frequently made speeches linking the Christian views to the fundamentalist views of the Nazis. He said that the Nazis did not believe in atheism and that this was something they wanted to remove from the country. With the majority of the country being Christian at the time, this was a strong belief shared by all, and meant that many people in the country were immediately drawn to Hitler purely because of these religious views that he expressed. In one speech he said, "I believe I would be no Christian, but a very devil if I felt no pity for them, if I did not, as did our Lord 2,000 years ago, turn against those by whom today these poor people are plundered and exploited." He was making the point that he was turning against certain people because of his religious beliefs, which appealed to many of the population and meant that they supported him and believed him to be a gift sent from God. It is easy to assume that the actions of the Nazis were not linked to fundamentalism or religion in any way, but this shows just how extreme fundamentalism can get. More recently, fundamentalist activities are being linked to Islam, because the groups that are carrying out these activities and attacks associate themselves with this religion. Terrorism is the unlawful use of violence and intimidation against others, usually civilians, and often for political gain. ISIS, the Al-Qaeda and the Taliban are good examples of terrorist groups and organisations. The term terrorism was originally used to describe the government during the French Revolution, and since then the meaning has changed to become how we use it today. In the mid-1800s, terrorism was used to describe violent revolutionaries, and by the time of the 20th century, it was used to describe the violent acts of several organised groups. Over time, nationalism became the main reason for terrorism. However, today the amount of terrorism experienced globally is becoming increasingly normalised for citizens, with religious fundamentalism now becoming the driving force behind the majority of the terror attacks that we see today.
The tower has come down. The tower has come down.
On the 11th of September 2001, the world witnessed one of the most significant terrorist attacks and what has possibly become the most well-known terrorist attack to this day. America was attacked by the terrorist group Al-Qaeda. 19 members of the group managed to hijack 4 passenger planes, some of them after months of training to be able to fly a plane, so that they could target specific places. They used the planes to crash into buildings, taking many lives in the process. 2 of the planes hit the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. 1 hit the Pentagon, while the other was wrestled into control by the passengers in order to crash into a field in what was their attempt to lose the least number of lives they could manage. Nearly 3,000 people were killed and many more injured in this suicide mission that was carried out by Islamic terrorists from Saudi Arabia as well as other nations. This attack was supposedly carried out in retaliation against the US government due to their continuing military presence in the Middle East, among other things. However, there have since been many conspiracy theories as to what was the real reason behind this attack. It could be argued that this attack changed the meaning behind the word terrorism and coined the term into how it is known today. Unfortunately, attacks like this one have led many people to now believe that terrorist groups have links to Islam. So what is the difference between fundamentalism and terrorism? Although fundamentalism can be linked to major events like those of the Nazis, it is not the actual act that is fundamentalism. Fundamentalism is simply the underlying religious belief and movements of the person or group of people, whereas terrorism is an act carried out usually with multiple targets in order to initiate a form of change, whether that be social, political, or religious. Terrorist acts are increasingly being carried out by followers of a certain religion, and recently we've seen many individuals carrying out these attacks to be followers of Islam. For example, the stabbings that have occurred recently in London. Both the concepts of fundamentalism and terrorism are fairly new and have only recently become a big part of society, or at least they've only recently become more recognised and discussed in society. The growth of fundamentalism represents a cultural war, with a clash between the secular and the sacred. Religious fundamentalism first came about in the 1880s in America, where at the time liberal Protestants made an attempt to adapt their lives to the modern world, while conservative Protestants opposed to do this. It was these conservative Protestants that believed the Bible should be understood literally, and they wrote a set of pamphlets named the Fundamentals. From them, fundamentalism became a way of rejecting the modern society due to the value of tradition, and activism has become strongly encouraged. According to Giddens in 1999, fundamentalists are traditionalists who seek to return to the fundamentals of their faith, and they support their argument using religious texts rather than a more modern rational argument. Although fundamentalism originated back in the 1800s, it is still a relatively new part of society, and it is a reaction to globalization and is undermining things like homosexuality that are now seen as social norms. Terrorism has been a long-standing occurrence to gain political attention and dominance. However, it is only more recently that it's become such an international issue. There have been nationalist terrorist groups before such international events like 9/11. For example, the IRA was a nationalist terrorist organisation formed by Irish Catholics in an attempt to form an independent republic rather than remaining a part of Great Britain. This also shows how the reason behind such terrorism was nationalism. However, since entering the 21st century, religious terrorism has become more of the focus. There are groups of all religions that have turned to forms of extremism, but Islamic groups are the ones that come to mind first. There is a long history of terrorism nationally, but it has only taken place on a larger international scale as we know it today in recent years. It is unfortunately becoming more common for religions to be associated with terrorism. Currently, it is believed by some that all Muslims are terrorists, as there have been many Islamic terrorist attacks recently. However, terrorism has been more strongly associated with other religions at different points in time, and it is simply the case that currently, most people carrying out terrorist attacks think of themselves as a part of this religion. However, this point is often overlooked by people in the Western world, as it seems easier to blame a whole group rather than to believe that terrorism is a more complicated issue.